Welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over the config flag, which uses a YAML configuration file to automate some options with the Fabric command line tool. So if we head over to where they outline the YAML configuration file use in the README, and to get to this page here, you would start out in the top of the Fabric repo and click on the CLI folder, and it's the README right here that is automatically rendered in your browser. And it just quickly explains how to use the flag, the demonstration or the example right here. And this one, I've noticed it doesn't use an equal sign here. This might be an older use or a previous version of the flag. I don't know. I know now that if you pulling up the help menu, if you take a look at it, it uses the equal sign. So I'm not sure it matters, but just a curiosity. It's hard to keep every single thing updated, So at any rate, it goes over how to use it, an example usage, the configuration precedents, the supported configuration options. So here, so far, the way it explains this, the options that you can pre-configure in a configuration file are selecting the model, the context length, these hyperparameters, the model parameters, the pattern that you want to use, and whether you want streaming and raw to be true or false. So I have to assume that in the future, they're going to include all of these options here, these flags. I would assume that they're going to integrate all those as they have time. And that's assuming that they're not configurable now. I'll test that. I'll test these things out and see if any other options can be used. But moving on, the rules and behavior, obviously you can only use the long form. You can't use the short flags. If you use any flags in the command line command while also using a config file, then any flags or options that you specify in the command are going to override any options that you specify in a config file. Unknown options, what they call declarations. If we tried to use one of these flags or options here and it wasn't supported, instead of kicking an error, it's just going to ignore them. And if you use accidentally or otherwise, if you used at the top of your config file, you set the context length to 4,000 or so, and then you specify the context length again at the bottom at 16,000 or something, whatever the last one that you've declared, meaning from top to bottom through the config file, through the YAML file, the last declaration of the same option wins out. And then when it says the order doesn't matter, what they mean is, you could list the model up here, you could list the model last, assuming you only list it once. It doesn't matter. The order of these things doesn't matter. And the type conversions that it supports, another shorter example config, and just specifying again that the overrides, anything that you specify in the command line command that you build is going to override anything that you've already specified in the config. So if you were using a config, a specific setup a lot, but you wanted to, at the moment, say you wanted to decrease the temperature or otherwise modify one of these options for that one-off run, you could specify, like here they specify for this run, they're going to override the temperature with 0.9. They're going to override the preset config temperature of 0.8. This is all pretty straightforward. This isn't super complex. So we should talk about where the configs are stored, and that's a place that you specify. So in this example, they just store this config YAML in this example anyhow. Of this example config YAML that they have in the example, they store this just in the main Fabric folder. When I say the main Fabric folder, I'm always referring to .config/Fabric. And for further organization, if you start getting a lot of config files and just a lot of other stuff, you could really start to junk up your Fabric folder. So if we head over there, it would, in the example, they store it right in this directory, which would be right in, the patterns and context, all those folders that are in this main Fabric configuration folder. But you can very easily just create your own. Like I name mine config files right here, and I've got some example ones. This is the blank, the mfab.config.yaml that I have in here. This is just a blank configuration file that I use to fill in when I want to make a new one. So the EW is an extract wisdom that I have set up. I have this pre-configured to run llama 3.2, 3b, context length to 16,000, left some of those empty, selecting extract wisdom, which is what I named the configuration file after. And this could be .yaml, whatever. It doesn't really matter for what we're doing here. And then just the couple other, the RQ, that's just raw query. For demonstration purposes, I don't use AI in raw query a whole lot in real life. I use them quite a bit in these videos and demonstrations just because they're simple to use and I don't have to set up elaborate user inputs to use these things. And then the sum is just for the summarized pattern. I'm keeping it all pretty simple here, obviously. And so to use those, say we're back in our home directory, to use these, you would just type fabric, the config, and then the destination. You would have to type this right out. So, and I'm sure that one day you're going to be able to type --config or even some shorter flag, and then you're going to be able to just specify file, because eventually I can almost guarantee that they're going to build this option into the tool where there's a set directory, like there's a set directory for patterns. You don't have to type the full path to a given pattern. There's a preset location. Just like they have preset locations for patterns, and just like they now have a preset location for strategies. Eventually, I have to assume that there's going to be a preset location for configuration files. But until they do, we have to type it out. And you could either keep your config files here in the fabric directory and then type the name of the config file, or like I have my own preset location, which is config files, and then any one of my config files like sum or raw query. This is how I would do this. And this right here, this command so far, this is just like typing -sp and the raw query pattern, setting some temperature and other hyperparameter or model parameters. It's just like doing that. And it's right now having to type all this out might or might not seem longer, maybe a little shorter for you than the standard way, but it's the process of standardizing something that you run over and over. And like in these demonstrations, I run raw query a lot, I run summarize a lot, I run extract wisdom a lot. And so what I do in lieu of doing this, where to finish this command, I could put in here our favorite question like this and run it, and you'll see that we get our response. And another thing you can do, if we head into our bash aliases file and head down where I have the fabric aliases, and just below where I keep those in my organizational flow of the bash aliases file, you'll see that I just aliased these things. This is what can really start to make it quick. And yes, you could just alias the full command without using the config file, but there's various reasons that you would want to do it like this. At least still do it like this until they build in a preset location for these config files, so that you don't have to type all this out and it become a simpler command. Doing FRQ and then running this gives us our normal response here. Let's take a look real quick again at our aliases, and we have freq, view, fsum. Each of those does exactly what you think they do. Just going to this configuration file location, pulling the config file itself, and then just typing in this quick alias, and then after that alias, just a space, and then whatever. It could be FRQ and some sort of question or statement, whatever. You could also, if you did the extract wisdom, then you could redirect some sort of file to it. You could cat the file to it, cat and pipe it, any number of things that you would normally do or that you would normally think of. So it's a pretty straightforward, very easy thing to use. Currently there is quite a bit of typing to put in the full path of the config file. I suppose that you could keep the config file right in your home directory. If you put it right in this home directory and saved it here, that would really reduce the typing when you're using the config flag. It would always be ~/ the config file. I guess that would really shorten it up. That's an idea. The only thing I don't like about that idea is I start to really junk up the user home directory, but it's a thought. Or you just alias to it, and that way, for something that's commonly used, you would just go into your config file itself to make any changes if you really noticed your own habits or patterns with that specific command that you use all the time start to change. And you're just changing it in one place in the config file, not in the bash aliases. I guess there's all kinds of reasons to lean one way or the other. I personally, I started to use the config files right away in real life. I'm in my actual workplace flow. I use it quite a bit, and I've just gotten used to it. I like the idea of it being organized in a file, not organized in a command in my bash aliases. I don't know, it just makes me more comfortable personally. So I guess whatever is your druther, what it is. So I hope that was clear. Hope I demonstrated that enough or thoroughly enough, I guess, for you to get it, to understand it, process it, and start to use it if it's something that's going to help you out at all. So we'll see you over in the next one.